Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Clark. And this is The Conservative Five, an online TV news production of Liberty Nation News. While Joe Biden was being hustled off the stage and stuffed back in his basement, Kamala Harris picked up the hardest leftist she could tap to be on her presidential ticket. Trump was nearly assassinated, and that kept everyone from paying attention to the craziness unfolding overseas. It seems with each passing day, the tensions throughout the world are growing. Iran, North Korea, and China are providing support to Russia to sustain its brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Iran is providing short-range missiles to Russia to replenish its supply to attack Ukraine. And a recent report from the U.S. intelligence community is revealing that Iran is back on the nuclear weapons development path. Is there any light at the end of the unsettling tunnel, Dave, or is that simply a train barreling toward us?
Well, I'm afraid, Sarah, it's a train, and it's moving fast. The Biden-Harris worldview is not capable of dealing effectively with the dangerous threats that the U.S. faces, every single day. And with every artillery shell, every attack drone, every short-range missile Russia gets from its allies, well, that means that Americans have to pay more to provide more weapons and munitions to Ukraine to counter those Russian weapons. The recent report by the U.S. intelligence community, as you say, indicates that Iran is continuing its pursuit of nuclear weapons. Well, shocker, But the U.S. report is imprecise and is written as though Iran developing nuclear weapons was an epiphany. The International Atomic Energy Commission, for all its faults, has been saying that same thing for 2 years. The U.S. intelligence community is really has some catching up to do. But the fact is that you have a real axis of evil, a real axis of threats when you look at Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and we just simply have to deal with them. You have to deal with them effectively. What are we doing in the Red Sea, for example? The Houthi terrorists in Yemen, backed by Iran, fire weapons at commercial vessels. We try to take them out, but we don't destroy the Houthis in Yemen. We don't destroy the ports from which they sail their unmanned sea vehicles. We have to destroy the evil that is causing such mayhem in the area.
Perhaps destroying Hamas might help? Or is that going to make it worse?
Yeah, you bring up a good point,
all we're
Sarah.
doing is slowing people down, it seems.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. Let me see. ISIS was declared a terrorist organization, and Trump went after it and destroyed it effectively. We have Hezbollah that is identified as a terrorist organization, Hamas that is identified as a terrorist organization, and yet we don't go after them with the same vigor that we went after ISIS.
Well, we let the Taliban take over in about 20 minutes. Once we pulled out of Afghanistan. Hey, come on, answers again. We're done. Anyway.
That was a Biden-Harris worldview consequence.
Yeah, well, whatever. I don't know. The evil axis seems to be China, Russia, and North Korea. If they team up, Clark, is it on?
Well, I think the complexity, as I think Dave is hinting, is a little different than maybe our traditional notions. The idea of a mutually assured destruction and nuclear salvos may actually be looming over us right now. There are some scary things going on in the world, and the technologies and the nuclear powers that exist today are truly terrifying. And our own nuclear armaments are quite dilapidated and neglected. I think Dave would agree. But I think the threat is bigger. And first of all, so you've asked me about the three countries. I think North Korea is always going to be a little bit of the odd man out of the party, a little bit of a Charles Manson, even for for China and Russia. But let's think about this a minute, because China and Russia have very different nuclear armaments, very different nuclear strategies, and very different geopolitical goals. And yet, where they're really cooperating, as Dave says, it costs money when we have to counter the armament costs. It destroyed the Soviet Union and us to be embroiled in Afghanistan fiscally. The long war that may be more destructive to America is a soft war of an economic collaboration, particularly between Russia and China, on food, on rare earth metals, on essential elements that are required for EV cars and microchip process and DEF. I mean, America is gradually losing its position in the world, not because of how many nuclear warheads it has, but because while its enemies are rubbing their hands together gleefully, we are fighting over abortion up until birth, over a 200-year-old civil rights, civil war. We're fighting over our borders and whether we should just fling them open or not. We have a fentanyl crisis. We have domestic enemies. We have terrorists here, Dave. We're not going after the Christian nationalists. I think that what we see, that the real threat to our world is, or to our country, is more domestic than foreign, and that those foreign enemies are just looking at these social justice warriors as their allies. They don't have to do anything. And so, I mean, that again sounds kind of dark, but I think it's where we are. We're talking about a geopolitical repositioning of the world, and America is at sleep with its domestic social justice squabbling, and we're not unified. The other nations are, and they're not facing these domestic problems, and they are actually upping their game economically. So I think Russia and China consolidated economically could be a far more destructive threat to this country than if they were military partners. And it seems that they're both.
Well, how do we make how does the US make the growling dogs stay in their crates, Graham? I mean, how do we come back out and say, nope, we're still in charge?
Well, that's a tough one, because and by far the biggest threat to us, whether it's geopolitical, economically or militarily, is China. And we should have dealt with that problem a long time ago, by drastic measures. I mean, there was a time that if we just had stopped buying Chinese goods altogether, their economy would collapse. We are by far their biggest customer. And that seems like a drastic measure. And today, even more so. Wow, could we actually do that? Could we actually completely divest ourselves from China? It would cause chaos throughout the world economy. But I actually, my personal belief is it would be worth it. It would be worth all the pain, because the Chinese would not survive economically without us as a customer. But that's just my personal view, and I'm sure Andrew or other economists would give me 1,000 reasons why, oh no, we shouldn't do that. But I believe it's better to have an economic Armageddon than a nuclear one. But here's the problem right now we've got, is that there is a very large amount of very real evidence that suggests the Biden family is wholly owned by the Chinese. And of course, that's a problem. And that's why really is not the only reason, but it's one of the main reasons why I believe that the Biden administration has never taken any strong action against any of our adversaries, because all our adversaries, as John Clark was just pointed out there, all of our adversaries, they may not be powers. Like China and Russia aren't really powers at all. As John said, they've got completely different worldviews, different cultures, different beliefs, and different goals. But it's the old saying: the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so China is in bed with North Korea, with Iran, and with Russia, all of our adversaries. And because it's China, and because the Biden family, as the evidence suggests, has enriched themselves off of China, they are not going to do anything to ruffle the Chinese feathers too much. Now, some people would say, well, but Joe Biden imposed tariffs on Chinese goods. Well, you know that behind the scenes they had a discussion about that with the Chinese, and I'm sure the Chinese said, "Yeah, go ahead and do that. When that's fine. Go ahead and do that. If that makes you look strong at home, then okay, But the reality is that we have an administration that is, for financial reasons, unwilling to go up against our adversaries. And also they know that they're going to ruffle too many feathers politically with the left. I mean, we can't be seen to be, going after Iran, because look at look at how many people in this country on the left would get upset if we actually did go after Iran, or if we went after Hezbollah, or we went after Hamas. There will be people burning American cities to the ground. And these would be people who support the Democratic Party. So, yeah, it's a mess. And is any of it solvable at this point? I'm not even going to try to. I'm not getting in the prediction game on that front. No.
Kamala has a plan. She stole it from Trump, and she's going to be a strong leader. So,
okay, so that brings up a question, Andrew. If all this money is going this way and that way, flying in between Iran and Russia and China, blah, 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 how do you keep an eye on the money trail that disappears and all of a sudden we see another on American soil attack? How do we keep track of this?
I will get to that in a moment. I'd like to address a couple things Graham said. So first of all, China's economy is slowing. That's one of the biggest threats to the global financial markets right now, is softening demand from China. Its property sector's collapsed. The local governments are immensely in debt. Trade in that country, exports are falling. They're importing a lot of stuff. That's one. Two, the biggest threat to the world, to the United States right now, is not geopolitics, not foreign policy. It's the national debt. It's going to be $52 trillion in the next 10 years, $2 trillion interest payments, $2 trillion annual budget deficit. Social Security is running out of money, so that's the biggest threat to the United States. On Russia, Russia's economy has been doing very well. Its invasion of Ukraine is probably the best things that happened to Russia. The economy is having the fastest growth streak in nearly 20 years. It's exporting a lot of oil. Oil revenues are up. I think even Dave alluded to this in our last C5 show. Now, to your question, Sarah. I think America's foreign policy is probably the biggest anti-America boondoggle and wealth redistribution scheme. The Biden administration, when it unfroze that few $billion in Iran, even Stevie Rich and Ray Charles, locked in a closet, blindfolded, could have seen the consequences of that decision. You have the U.S. extending its tentacles in every crevice of the world, bribing dictators with foreign aid, forcing allies to adopt similar adventurism policies, destabilizing regions that have also sparked unintended consequences. I'm gonna have to quote former Congressman Ron Paul here in 2008 when he was on a Fox News debate and he was talking foreign policy. And I may cause Dave to have a burst of blood vessel here, and maybe he want a regime change somewhere. I don't. Maybe a regime.
Close your ears. Close your ears.
But anyway, so he says, "quote We have Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. They have nuclear weapons, and we're giving them money." Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government while we promote democracy in Iraq. And that is a summary of how convoluted, expensive, and dangerous the U.S. foreign policy is, not just for the world, but also a highly indebted country that needs the rest of the world to buy U.S. Treasury securities to maintain this semblance of a superpower.
Dave, you have a
I see a vein.
I'll tell you, the basic assumption that Andrew comes at this is that Republican administrations are, by their very nature, immune from lunacy, and they aren't.
Are you sure about that? I'm pretty sure there's some
they have their
lunacy
share
involved.
And in each of those cases, if you pull the thread all the way through, you find that the decision was made totally for different reasons than the one that Ron Paul conflated. But nonetheless, the consequences are pretty much the same. And if all of us were prescient and able to foretell the future, we probably wouldn't make those kinds of mistakes. But nonetheless, politicians do. And we look back on them and would hope that that American politicians and leadership would see these kinds of errors and not make them again. I know suddenly Pollyanna, is
What happened to
alive and
you?
well. But it really goes back to a fundamental mistake that underpins all manner of different administrations, and that is the mantra that, well, our foreign policy is based on the concept of, if we're real nice to you, then you'll be real nice to us, right? Well, no, of course not. Other countries have their own self-interest. And we seem to be the only country that traditionally and regularly suborns our national interest to the interests of others. And that's why we're in the position that we are.
That evokes the Trump's address to the UN. I can't remember which year it was, but Trump's address to the UN, where he said precisely that. And I thought, well, finally, someone who is actually looking at foreign policy from a completely realistic and pragmatic point of view. He told all those countries, I am going to defend America's interests. I'm going to put America's interests first. Each one of you would do the same for your country. And I totally understand that. And I'm not criticizing you for it. That's what you're going to do, obviously, and I'm going to do the same thing. And it was actually refreshing to hear a US president actually say that to the rest of the world.
Instead of, hey, come on over and shake my money tree.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, though. So if the United States didn't have all these foreign entanglements and have all these troops in South Korea and Middle East and Africa, all those troops could be home right now defending the United States from either the invasion of the southern border or some other external threats. That's just mind-numbing to me. And I'm not sure if Graham meant to say this. I'm not sure if he actually supports the U.S. Attacking Iran or attacking them like the Houthis, but if you were to attack Iran, you already see the chaos in the global energy markets right now. $80 a barrel on the brink of perhaps Israel and Iran war. If that were to happen, of course there'll be a wider regional conflict, and you're going to have greater inflationary pressures move at a time when you already have above trend high cost of living in a country where everyone just hates this economy. So if you were prepared to do that, prepared also for the inflationary consequences. Now, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Graham. I think that's what
I get it, and I appreciate the fact that you made the point that you weren't putting words in my mouth. No, I just mentioned the fact that obviously the Biden administration, they're not going to take any direct action against the Iranians because they would upset too many of their progressive supporters and friends. But no, the last thing we want to do is be attacking, launch a military attack on Iran would be a terrible idea. I mean, the thing is, we could have probably by now, if we'd set our minds to it, we could have probably many years ago orchestrated, or at least not orchestrated, but facilitated the bringing down of the mullahs and the replacement of them by more sensible people, because most of the Iranian people actually are quite fond of the United States, but it's the lunatics that are running that country, and we could have probably aided some more sensible Iranians in overthrowing their government, which is probably something we could have done. And I know everyone thinks, oh my God, what another terrible, awful CIA overseas adventure that's going to end in disaster.
Terrible adventure.
All we had to do is give a certain amount of support, financial and otherwise, to the people in Iran who are actually ready and willing to rise up against their own government. And the couple times they've done that over the last 15, 20 years, we turned our backs on them. And I think that was a mistake. In fact, our entire reaction to what was called the Arab Spring was a complete disaster. And if we'd handled that whole situation better, we could have, without firing a single shot, we could have got rid of several of our adversaries in the Middle East and North Africa, just like that. But
Andrew,
we failed to rise up to the task.
So
Oh,
Andrew,
I know Dave's gonna say, "Ooh, regime change in Iran." I
ooh,
love
regime
it.
change. No, Andrew, I just want to remind you back in 1986 that
I was not
Iran.
born yet. I was not born yet.
Shut up, Andrew.
That's
Good
what we
grief.
have books for, Andrew. We have books.
You got the
And
Google.
that in 1986, Iran was being mischievous in the Arabian Sea, and we sent half their navy to the bottom. And it sent a message. And oh my gosh, the oil prices didn't go sky high because you know why? Because all of their regional neighbors were delighted that we did this. If Iran were a hail fellow well met in the region, yes, you'd have a point. They aren't. They are the scourge of the region, and all of their neighbors believe that.
But if you look at reports, there was the IOC, the Islamic Organization Council, the regional group of those countries. They all support Iran, and they all say that they would back Iran if they were to retaliate against Israel. So perhaps maybe that was the case 40 years ago, but today the messaging is completely different. And you see this also in the global energy markets. The markets are never wrong. Markets are never wrong, dude.
He says under his breath, not fully believing what he's
Okay, so
saying.
now we have trustworthy Andrew. Well, anyway, guys, we got to wrap this up, and we all know whatever America decides on November 5th will affect the global community as well as our own nation. And Liberty Nation News will keep you informed. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.